When it comes to Australia, what comes to many people's minds is vast wilderness, endless deserts, kangaroos and koalas. But what you may not know is that Australia is not only the sixth largest country in the world, it is also the most sparsely populated continent in the world. If we move Australia to Europe, its area is enough to cover Spain, Ukraine, Britain and Italy. But its total population is less than half of the UK. Not only that, populated cities like Tokyo and New Delhi, their populations easily exceed Australia's total. For example, the Kimberley region in Western Australia, it covers over 420,000 square kilometers. Almost the same as the entire state of California, but the permanent population is only about 50,000. That's less than 1 person per square kilometer. Another example is the Nullarbor Plain in South Australia. Also, it covers an area of 200,000 square kilometers, but there is almost no population on this flat land. There is only one railway and highway across the continent, passing through here, and the name of this area, Nullarbor, means countless land in Latin. It's because the inland of Australia is too remote that it relies on the Royal Flying Doctor Service. The Royal Flying Doctor Service, it provides air medical services for the few residents. To provide air medical services, it has a unique coastline, abundant minerals and resources. Why hasn't it attracted more people to settle down? What is the reason why this continent, which is almost the same size as the US, only barely support a small population? Today, let's explore from multiple perspectives such as climate, history, and politics to reveal the mystery of the sparse population on this mysterious continent. First, the Australian continent spans tropical and subtropical. The northern region is close to the equator, while the southern part is closer to the South Pole. So the northern regions have a humid tropical climate, while the south is influenced by the Antarctic current, causing wet and cold winters. This north-south span creates significant temperature differences. For example, the northern regions, including Darwin, the capital of the Northern Territory, Queensland and other places, where precipitation is concentrated with distinct rainy and dry seasons with high temperatures and high humidity. Typical tropical climate. In the south, Victoria, Tasmania and other places have distinct seasons. In winter, the cold air brought by the Antarctic current affects the southern coast, causing the temperature here to be lower, forming a wet and cold winter. Secondly, the Great Dividing Range in eastern Australia is a 3,500 kilometers long mountain range extending along the east coast. This mountain range, not only a geographical boundary in Australia, but also a climate boundary. It blocks the humid air from the Pacific Ocean, forming a rain shadow effect, resulting in sufficient precipitation on the eastern coast, such as Sydney and Brisbane on the coast. On the other side of the Great Dividing Range, due to the moisture cannot cross the mountains, the inland areas are in the rain shadow area. These areas have less precipitation and large evaporation. A typical arid desert climate is naturally formed. Currents also have a significant impact on Australia. The cold ocean current in the south, from the Antarctic Ocean, flows towards the coasts of South Australia and Western Australia, bringing cold water, which inhibits evaporation and precipitation, resulting in less rainfall in the western and southern coastal areas, making the climate dry and cool. The warm current in the east passes through the coasts of Queensland and New South Wales, bringing moist air to the eastern region, making the climate here relatively humid and warm. In addition, the climate of Australia is also deeply influenced by El Niño and La Niña. El Niño and La Niña are two patterns of ocean and climate change. Simply put, El Niño means abnormal rise in sea temperature in the eastern Pacific Ocean, which leads to more heavy rain in South America, and warmer winters in North America, and droughts in Southeast Asia and Australia. The corresponding La Niña is the abnormal decrease in sea temperature in the eastern Pacific, which will lead to a relatively dry South America, and colder winters in North America, and more rainfall in Southeast Asia and Australia. In short, El Niño is warm, while La Niña is cold. They will cause global weather changes. So it's not hard to see that the climate conditions in Australia are extreme and changeable. Many regions are either hot and humid, or dry and hot, ultimately affecting the distribution of human distribution and lifestyles. 90% of Australia's population live within 50 kilometers of the coast, such as Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, and Adelaide, which almost account for more than half of Australia's population. Also, the central part of Australia has endless wilderness. However, in terms of land suitable for farming and living, the actual utilization rate is quite low. According to the data, only about 6% of Australia's land is suitable for farming. In contrast, about 18% of land in the US is suitable for farming. Even so, the 6% arable land, due to extreme climates and water shortages, cannot be utilized as efficiently as in other countries. In addition, geological features have also imposed significant limitations on Australia's population. After a long geological evolution, the Australian continent lacks the formation of new mountains and glacial activity. These two processes are usually the result of crustal movement and rock uplift, which can promote the continuous renewal and fertility of soil. However, since the Precambrian, especially since the Carboniferous period, the end, Australia has hardly experienced such geological changes. This lack of new geological activity has led to the soil in Australia have been affected by climate and weather for a long time, resulting in continuous erosion. On other continents, such as soils in North America, Europe, and Asia, usually does not exceed 10,000 years. In contrast, the soil erosion time in Australia exceeds 250 million years. This is why the inland areas of Australia look so desolate. So although Australia has a large area of land, the land truly suitable for human settlement is relatively limited, which leads to the population distribution is concentrated in a few places with suitable conditions. In fact, for a long time, Australia was like an invisible continent, unknown to the world. Millions of years ago, Australia was part of the Gondwana continent, was connected to South America, Africa, Antarctica, etc. Later continental drift made Australia gradually isolated and floating, making it an isolated island continent. This process created the biological isolation zone in Australia. Biological species cannot migrate freely, forming a unique ecosystem. For example, only in Australia can only be seen in Australia kangaroos and koalas. This geographical isolation also applies to humans, making the continent until 50,000 years ago. Humans arrived under the geographical conditions at that time, crossed the islands of Southeast Asia today. With the rising sea level, this path finally disappeared. Australia became a truly isolated place. In the following thousands of years, the Aboriginals developed unique languages, culture, and way of life. In other continents of the world, when civilizations were exchanging and developing, the Aboriginal people in Australia have always maintained an independent and closed lifestyle. You may think, didn't Europe start the age of navigation later? Why Australia hadn't been developed? In fact, as early as the 17th century, Dutch explorer Willem Janszoon discovered Australia. But he regarded the continent as a barren land. 50 years later, another Dutch ship, the Verelata, sank off the coast of WA. The survivors managed to return to the Dutch East Indies for help, while the remaining crew members disappeared in Australia, became one of the mysterious disappearance stories. These events made early explorers' impression of Australia more barren and uninhabitable until the end of the 18th century, because the British prisons were overcrowded, decided to use Australia as a place of exile, sending a large number of criminals and laborers. In 1788, Britain established the first settlement in Sydney, and the modern history of Australia began. However, living conditions in Australia were still harsh. It still did not attract large-scale European immigration. But the turning point came in 1851. The gold mine discovered in Victoria, which ignited the first immigration boom. Thousands of Britons came to dig for gold. The population of Australia surged. But when the gold was exhausted, the number of immigrants dropped rapidly. This reversal from gold rush to cooling down, which kept Australia's sparse population. In addition to the above natural limitations, Australia's population policy also made matters worse in history. In the early 20th century, the Australian government implemented the White Australia policy. Simply put, it only accepted white immigrants, especially those from the UK. It was officially implemented in 1901, aiming to maintain pure European bloodlines, Asians, Africans, and even immigrants from Southern Europe. This racial discrimination directly led to Australia's disadvantage in immigration. At a disadvantage, but in the United States, Canada, and other places, were constantly absorbing immigrants from around the world. This situation continued until after World War II. Due to the damage of the war, and the European economy was sluggish, which opened up immigration policies for Australia to increase the population and improve the workforce. In the 50s, the Australian government began gradually relaxed immigration policy. It first introduced a large number of immigrants, Greece and Eastern Europe. However, despite the relaxation of the policy, the White Australia policy still strictly restricted non-white. It wasn't completely abolished until 1973, so it is not difficult to see that, in the context of nature and human history, it led to the sparsity of population in all. However, even in the only living areas, the threat of climate change is also increasing. For example, for the densely populated area in southeastern Australia, the Murray-Darling Basin is the main water source. However, due to the intensification of drought, the Murray-Darling River has dried up in many places. The data shows that the annual water volume of the entire basin is only 2.4 trillion cubic meters. In contrast, the Mississippi River in the United States has an annual water volume of 53 trillion cubic meters. Compared with Australia's only large river, it's less than 5% of it. In addition, forest fires occur in Australia almost every year, especially in summer. Extreme heat often turns originally dry vegetation quickly turn into a powder keg. The fire season from 2019 to 2020 became the worst in Australian history. The burned area exceeded 18 million hectares, equivalent to half of Japan. As we mentioned above, only 6% of Australia's land is suitable for farming. Although the proportion is low, but the area is still not small. However, the problem is that extreme heat and lack of water resources, which directly affect the yield of crops. Take wheat as an example. Australia was one of the top 10 wheat exporters in the world, but frequent droughts and extreme weather have caused significant fluctuations which directly affects the global market. Besides agriculture, Australia's animal husbandry is also quite good. According to the data, Australia has over 100 million sheep, which is 4 times the population. Its wool export ranks first in the world, and beef exports are also world-leading. However, the huge scale of agriculture also brings the problem of excessive water consumption, especially in pastoral areas like Queensland and New South Wales. Water shortage makes the cost of raising livestock more expensive. Shepherds have to rely on deep wells or water transfer systems to maintain pastures. Many ranchers are facing bankruptcy pressure. So, the larger the scale of agriculture, the greater the water crisis will be, becoming the contradiction of Australian agriculture. Therefore, under the dual pressures of climate change and resource use, it is foreseeable that Australia's population growth rate will not be too fast. According to recent data, by 2050, Australia's population will reach about 32 to 35 million. But by then, the global population is expected to reach about 9.7 billion. Okay, this video is over here. If you like it, don't forget to give a like below, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Looking forward to seeing you next time.